the 20 and the 10, and look at that, he loses his way into the...
Hello and welcome to episode 31 of Shanalytics. This is your bi-week special. Today we're going to be covering a few different things with my guy Vinny Saglimbeni. First, we're going to be talking about the Indianapolis Colts, DeForest Buckner. There's a lot to touch on there for sure, no question about that. We'll talk about the offense a little bit and some of the players who've been missing from the 49ers. And just so everybody knows, Vinny and I do this every single Monday. We alternate on our channel, so make sure you subscribe to Vinny if you aren't already. All of his information is in the description below. Vinny, how are you doing on this Monday? We got Sunday Night Football ahead of us. Good week of football back to back. Really, I mean, it's been one of my favorite football seasons. Vinny, how are you doing?
Yeah, it's going good. And like Jason Aponte tweeted yesterday, like, the NFL seemed to hit every primetime game really well. And so it's been good. It's good to see the Niners ahead of the Seahawks in the standings. And I think you got a little bit – Seahawks fans kind of got a little bit of sense of empathy, it feels like, understanding what other fans have felt like for years, having to go against Russell Wilson and them realizing how – good he is. So, but yeah, a big week this week for the Niners. I mean, like we mentioned last week, I think this was very needed, this bye week. And, a big one, Sunday Night Football against the Indianapolis Colts. And like you mentioned, the return of DeForest Buckner. So Absolutely. That'll be fun to track throughout the week.
Yeah, that's going to be one of those fun storylines that's going on all throughout the week. I see Barry Baller in the comment saying no Trey at practice today. We're going to get into everything quarterback related, but first, let's start with this. Let's start with the Indianapolis Colts, because this is a 2-4 football team who just completely blew out the Houston Texans. And this is a team that, and I tweeted about this earlier, Vinny, I don't think is a very good football team, but I think it's kind of a bad matchup for the 49ers.
I think it's definitely an interesting one, especially with how decent Carson Wentz was last year with the Eagles, and not like in that game at least. Even with Doug Peterson as his coach, and he's been better with Frank Reich. And
he really looks like he's having a career resurgence with him. I mean, it seems like if anyone is going to get him back on track, it's got to be Frank Reich.
Yeah. And then you saw, the strength of their team, I think, which is, like you mentioned, the strength of their team is what the Niners have had a little bit of their weakness with, and that's Jonathan Taylor. He had a really good day running yesterday, and I think that's something that they could really use to exploit the 49ers, but yeah, it's definitely an interesting matchup altogether. Receivers wise, I don't think the corners at least should have as many problems as the guys they faced prior. I mean, Paris Campbell was one of the main guys. Michael Pittman's pretty good.
It's not a horrible group, but it's I think we lost Vinny for a sec. Oh, he's back. But I was just gonna agree with you, Vinny, that this isn't the most talented team on the outside necessarily. It's not gonna be dependent on the 49ers winning really tough one-on-one matchups against the Indianapolis offense, at least.
I think so, and I think I think this should be a game the 49ers should win, regardless of who's at quarterback. I think defensively, we talk about Buckner and we talk about, Darius Leonard. We know how good those guys are, but everywhere else, I think there's a chance for this team to, exploit the Colts' weaknesses as well. And I'm gonna be honest, I haven't watched a lot of Colts film at all. I got a buddy who's a big Colts fan, so I'll talk with him throughout the week. But I mean, this should be a game the 49ers should win, and I think they're more than capable of doing that on Sunday night, regardless of who is going to be quarterback.
Yeah, and with the Colts, I want to go over a few things for them, right? If you look at their DVOA on offense and defense, the 49ers are technically better in both areas, but that's where I talked about the bad matchup, Vinny, right? Because I think this is obviously not as talented as a team of the 49ers, and I think if you just look at this team on paper, this is a team the 49ers should be 8 times out of 10, 9 times out of 10. I mean, they're just a better overall football team when you look top to bottom. The problem is that the Colts are able to produce lots and lots of turnovers. Their defense has been really, really bad, but they rank top 10 or top 5 in the league right now in producing turnovers. And that's where obviously we don't know exactly who the starting quarterback is going to be. And we'll talk about that in a minute because I know I see people in the comments. I know things are happening. I'll bring up tweets as we're going, guys, today because there's some news happening just as we've been talking these last 10 minutes. But yeah, with the Colts defense, right? That cornerback room is just as bad, if not worse, than the 49ers. And I think the hope is, from the 49ers perspective, is that if you can contain DeForest Buckner and really keep Jimmy or Trey upright and give them enough time, this is a team that, because your receivers are so good, they should just win these matchups. And you should win the game solely because of that, in my opinion. Then I think you look across the rest of the board, right? You mentioned Jonathan Taylor, how they might struggle with that. And I think that's been the weakness of the 49ers defense so far. But on the flip side of that, I think where teams have really gotten the 49ers is when they've been able to score quickly, have big explosive plays all the time, right? And go on drives back to back where they really put pressure on them by not holding the ball for that long and converting huge chunk plays. I think if the 49ers can limit those kinds of chunk plays against a team like the Colts, who shouldn't get that many chunk plays, right? And they just let Jonathan Taylor run the ball 30 times, I think that would be great for the 49ers, honestly, because in my mind, that it keeps your best side of the ball on the field more your defense, because that means the Colts are going to ball control, right? And then gives you less opportunities to get turnovers. It looks like Jimmy Garoppolo could be the starting quarterback. And with how many turnovers this Indianapolis defense has been able to produce and how many turnovers we've seen Jimmy Garoppolo give up over the years, that's where I would worry about this if I were Kyle, right? Is that you don't want to get into a game where, the Colts have a few back-to-back explosive plays for touchdowns. You're down a touchdown, then Jimmy turns it over again. Then you're in a real hole. And that's how I feel like the game script could potentially go if things don't go the 49ers way. But getting back to what I was saying, if the Colts run the ball in ball control and then the 49ers do the same and they're willing to commit to Elijah Mitchell or Trey Sermon, just any running back at this point, I think they can really just run out the clock on this Indianapolis team. And because they get better possessions, more quality possessions, that's where I think they can take advantage of this matchup against Indianapolis, because this is an Indianapolis team that has been, or this is a 49ers team, sorry, that has been really, really good at moving the ball up and down the field, right, Vinny? I think we've seen it all season from them. The problem is if you look at the numbers, they don't get many red zone opportunities. They don't get inside the 20 much, but when they do, they're extremely efficient. They scored 10 of 11 times. The only time when they didn't score was on that Trey Lance 4th and goal when he went for it and he got stopped at the goal line, right? It's the only time they didn't score. So I think if they can figure out some of the nuances with this Indianapolis defense and really take advantage of their corner situation, this should be a game the 49ers should get ahead in early and keep the lead. But with the 49ers so far as we've seen, I don't think that's likely.
Yeah, and I think with that too, I think they need to come out and, establish themselves early on in the game because, in theory, you've had 2 weeks to prep for this game.
Yeah.
Right. You don't want to fall behind. And Because if they do fall behind, if they fall behind bad and, quick, then I think that's going to be, then I think that's a concern because you had 2 weeks to prep for this team. And, this was your time where, you need to take advantage of, not just what you can control, but, what's happening with other teams in the division, right? Like Seattle's 2-5. Like I had them at 10 wins heading into the year. So that means they have to finish the rest of the season with only 2 losses. And given their schedule, they're probably going to lose more than 2 games the rest of the year. Right. And you look at the Niners schedule, like we've talked about it before, right? Like they need to take advantage of the games that they can control and that they can win. And this is definitely one of those games. And and we'll get into it a little bit later about how the offense can get into the groove. And I talked about it last week. Get the ball into the hands of your playmakers. Like get those guys touches, like your Debo and Ayuk in particular. Kittle won't be out there this week, but get a couple passes into Rostwell. He can catch the ball. Like he's got some of the best hands on the team, and use check, use some of those other guys. Like, and that's where I think they can really try and take advantage. And like, yeah, some of these games may not be like gimme games per se, but like, and like, because every game in the NFL is hard, but like,
yeah.
But these should be games where they should really, especially like this week in particular, you had 2 weeks to prep. You got to take advantage of that and show the direction of where this team can go going forward. Because like we mentioned last week during the bye week, the season is not over. Like there's no reason not to have hope for the team. Because I think there's still a chance, although it's going to be a very hard thing to do. I think there's still a chance that they can make the playoffs. So, yeah.
Well, and real quickly, I just want to bring this over because I saw it happening live, and I think it is worth. Let me get you guys over. Where are we? Okay, so Vinny, it looks like Jimmy Garoppolo's already practicing today. Trey Lance is not. What's kind of your instant reaction to this? What do you think the 49ers game plan should be right now? And that let me put it to you this way, Vinny. If Trey Lance were to practice by Wednesday this week and be a full participant, how would you feel going into the week if Jimmy was still named the starting quarterback?
Again, I think they can beat the Colts with their quarterback. I do. I really do. And I would feel a little more comfortable with Trey Lance being that guy because of just because of the reps that he needs, and especially in a big game like a Sunday night game, like his first start, like his second start being a Sunday night game against a solid defensive team. I would like to see him play if he can, but at the same time, I think you got to be a little bit more cautious with Trey's injuries than Jimmy's injuries. And I know that's not necessarily, that doesn't sound fair for Jimmy, but there's an understanding that Trey Lance is the future of this franchise.
Right.
And you want to make sure that you don't want to have anything impeding his development, especially with injuries and especially with this knee injury. I think that's something that's going to be interesting to follow. I would like to see, if he's back tomorrow, then I think you can, I just don't think they should risk getting Trey hurt again if he's not 100%. That's where I think it's a little bit
and I
having a little bit more
on that.
A little more cautious on that end.
For sure, and I think the 49ers are probably being super cautious with this injury and the situation because obviously Trey's the future of their franchise. But, Vinny, I know we had another topic that we were going to bring up, but let's just go right into, how do we think this 49ers offense is going to get back on track? Because right now, from everything that we're seeing reported, it seems like Jimmy Garoppolo could be the starting quarterback this week. One thing I wanted to talk about with this situation, Vinny, is the quarterback situation, right? Jimmy, Trey. Obviously, right now, I don't think that's as much of a question because we just don't know who will be available Sunday. But let's talk about this. How do you think I know everybody's been trashing Kyle Shanahan's offense. During the bye, they've been talking about all the problems the 49ers have been having. How do you think specifically they get back on track with the running game? Because I think you look at this team, you can't be mad about how they've passed the ball, how they move the ball passing, right? I think they've done a fairly good job with that. But then at times they've been able to run the ball, but then they won't commit to the run, and they'll even go away from it at the end of the game. So do you feel like that this is just a matter of Kyle Shanahan needs to commit better to the run and give more carries to running backs? Because I think that's just the first step for me, at least.
Yeah, and I think Shanahan shouldn't be afraid to run the things that he would run if Mostert or Jeff Wilson were in the game, because I know they run a lot more like of that outside zone read, those outside tosses with Mostert, and I think they can do that same thing with Elijah Mitchell with his speed. Yes, they may not be able to get some of the same, like his vision, like Elijah Mitchell's vision isn't the same as Raheem Mostert's vision, but I think getting more of those zone reads, getting your blockers out in front, I think is something that we've seen the 49ers be pretty successful at. And not only can they do that with Elijah Mitchell, but I think they can do that with Trey Sermon too. Trey Sermon did a lot of zone stuff when he was in college. So I think doing that, and also I kind of want to see them run a little more towards the strong side of the O-line, because I feel like a lot of the runs are like directed more towards McGlinchey and Brunskill. And I think McGlinchey in terms of run blocking is doing pretty well. Like I think he's really good at run blocking, but Brunskill has shown to struggle a little bit. And, Trent Williams is pretty good. I think that's safe to say. Yeah. So why not, get your guys, get Juszczyk on that side too, and just, really use that, because I think if they did run a little more to that left side, then maybe we'd see a little bit more success, like running behind your, one of your highest paid players on your team. So, and also in general, I think with seeing Brunskill's struggles, I think at this point, why not throw Aaron Banks in there? What is you drafted him with your second round pick. He's a top 50 pick. I think there's no how much worse could he be at this point? No, and I'm not saying that as like a shot to Brunskill and everything. And I just think Brunskill, I just don't think Brunskill, I don't know. I just look at him. I think he was better overall as that swing tackle in 2019. And granted, context in the teams that they played matters and everything, but you invested a top 50 pick in this kid. Why not use him, and why not play him? And similarly to Trey Lance, some of these other guys, get these reps in for him to continue to develop, because I think he is a decent piece, and there's a reason why they drafted him. Like, he is good. And he's obviously he's having a little bit of an adjustment into the NFL, hence why he hasn't played in the first 6 games. But, what do you have to lose there? And why not play him? So that's a couple of things in particular with the, running game. And I think, get some of those Debo sweeps back and get some of those Ayuk sweeps back. Like I mentioned, get the hands in the playmakers, get the hands into your playmakers, because we've seen, and we talked about it after the Arizona game, you saw after catch on one Ayuk play, you can get that. There's that one Ayuk throw that he converted a first down. It was a pretty decent yards after catch, but I just think they need to, get the hands into your playmakers and, get your blockers out more in space and get them more, pushed up the field, because that's what you've seen success with in the past.
Yeah, and for me, I'm going to echo a lot of the same of what you were saying, which is that I think, first of all, they need to commit more to that zone running scheme. They need to put more variety in what they're doing, and they need to be able to put better window dressing on it, which is funny because that's something I think the past Kyle has been so excellent with. And I really think they have to get Ayuk and Debo involved behind the line of scrimmage. When they needed yards at any point last year, when they needed a chunk play, when they needed to get a few yards on a second down, every single time the ball was getting in Ayuk and Debo's hands. And if it needed to, they would give them jet sweeps, fly sweeps. They would do end arounds. They would do whatever they could to get the ball in these guys' hands. And this year, they just can't even get Ayuk involved at all. So you need to get Brandon Ayuk involved more. You need to be willing to target him more. And I know there are ways that Kyle Shanahan can just manufacture touches for those guys, and he hasn't done that at all this year. In fact, with Ayuk, seems like he's avoiding him altogether. I just don't really get it. So you need to get the ball in his hands. And then you also need to stop playing freaking Mohamed Sanu and Travis Benjamin. What are we doing? I'm sorry. Why is Jawan Jennings not in the game? Like, why is Travis Benjamin even on an NFL roster at this point, Kyle? Because I'm sorry, if the 49ers cut him tomorrow, how many teams would be lining up for Travis Benjamin's services? Like we're talking about CFL teams. So I really think that Kyle just needs to get out of his own way and stop having such a big ego with this situation, because he's either very scared or this is his ego keeping certain players off the field, certain players on the field. And quite honestly, I think it's always been frustrating that there's certain players that Kyle's played over others, right? That's always been an issue. But to get to the point now where it's so utterly obvious that he just has favorites. Like, he just does. And if you are one of Kyle's favorites, then he will play you. And Mohamed Sanu and Travis Benjamin, for some reason, are prime examples of that. So we need to stop doing that. And then, like I said, just get your pass catchers involved at the line of scrimmage. There's easy ways to manufacture yards, and I know you can do it, Kyle, because we've seen you do it over and over. So for all those Jimmy Gimmies we see, for all the Nick Mullins offense situations we see, for all the CJ Beathard offense of moments that we see where you can literally just create yards out of nothing, Kyle, why aren't you doing this year? You need to commit to that this year, because right now your running game is struggling and people don't fear you in the run game. Okay, and because of that, the 49ers can't really get their play action passing game on track. So you got to commit to the run. You got to be willing to commit to the run. And then you got to get your playmakers involved at the line of scrimmage to keep teams honest with the run and stretch it out even further. And then everything else can play off that. So, Kyle, you really just got to commit to the run, in my opinion. I don't know how else to say it, because it's weird. Kyle, you barely run the ball when you have Trey Lance in the game. Why? I'm sorry. I don't want Trey Lance dropping back and having to scramble 8 times a game, right? That's not going to work. And with Jimmy Garoppolo, if they play anything similar to what they played against Arizona, it's going to be really ugly with Jimmy in the game. So you got to do something to fix this offense, Kyle, and keep teams more honest.
Yeah, and a couple other things too. You mentioned Jawan Jennings getting more snaps. I'd like to see Trent Sherfield get more snaps too.
What happened to him?
Yeah, like I just don't like, because he would talk about but there was a point where he was wide receiver too.
I thought he was wide receiver too. I mean, everyone in the building was talking about him as if he was like the second coming of Antonio Brown, and he had already supplanted Brandon Ayuk. Oh, there was no way. Brandon Ayuk getting beat out by Trent Sherfield. This is all Trent Sherfield. He's just so excellent. Well, where the hell's Trent Sherfield? Because you guys have been talking about him so much off season.
Yeah, and I think he is.
To use him, and you aren't.
Yeah, and I think he is good too. Like, he's not a bad player.
Too.
Like, he did well in the preseason. Like, I would like to see him get a little bit more reps, and I think they're doing well with the use check usage. I think they're using him a lot more than years past. And I think that's something that's a positive. And another thing too that I would like to see, like, and you talked about the way that they played against Arizona, play more under center. Get your quarterback under center.
God, yeah.
Like, I think that's something that they could really. That's the Shanahan MO. Right, that get your quarterback under center, establish the running game with the zone running scheme, and then use that for play action. And that's something that we haven't really seen a lot this year. And it really worked 2018 with not as good of a roster as this. I mean, Like not as good offensive weapons as this team has. So I think, yeah, those are just some other things that I think, could get the offense back on track, get back to that old identity that you had that got you that success in the first place.
Because I'll tell you this right now, Vinny, the 49ers have no offensive identity right now. And that's one of the biggest problems, I think, is that this is the most vanilla version of the 49ers, and they're executing it the worst. So, I think we expect better from Kyle. He should just be better. This is on you, Kyle. I don't know what to say. But I do want to move on to the next topic we wanted to cover. I wanted to talk about, some of the players we just mentioned, some of the guys we've been talking about. Let's talk about some 49ers who have been missing, who have kind of gone missing. First of all, let's start with Brandon Ayuk. I know we just touched on him a little bit there, Vinny, but do you think if for Ayuk moving forward, do you feel like this is something that's going to persist for the rest of the year? And, he's just going to have to deal with it this season and whatever's going on in the building is going on? Or do you feel like this is something he can overcome through the season?
I think this is definitely something he, and not just him and the team, can overcome. Because
the team,
and
because I thought about that.
Yeah, because I think ultimately there's going to be situations where you just have to get this guy involved. Like you have to. Like otherwise, like you mentioned, if you're giving those targets to, Travis Benjamin, Juwan Jennings, Mohamed Sanu, then those are going to be situations where you may not be as likely to win that particular day. But yeah, and again, this isn't like a Pettis situation. I don't think the talent gap between the two, I think, is honestly considerable because I think, and I'm not saying that like Dante Pettis is a bad player. He's actually like a pretty decent player, but it's just
people talk about Brandon Ayuk as the talent of a true number one wide receiver in the NFL, and that's what he was.
Yeah, they were like. There was one crazy what was that comparison Des had?
Oh, it was Davante Adams. Davante Adams.
Was it Davante Adams or was it someone?
No, people were comparing Brandon Ayuk to Davante Adams during the offseason.
Well, no, and that's like, given who his quarterback is and how his quarterback develops, I think that could be a similar like duo. I don't think that's fair to compare Brandon Ayuk to Davante Adams though. Like Davante Adams is kind of unreal.
Yeah,
I thought I saw a mini TO too. I don't know, but so it was something. It was something like I'm gonna look it up now. But yeah, I think I'm not like. I think this is something that can be solved throughout the year, and part of it is on the offense for getting him the ball, but he did struggle a little bit in preseason, and part of it is going to be on him too to really step up and establish like, hey, this is my role, this is my, I want to be the wide receiver one of this team, because regardless of whether he's a 49er or like not in the future, there's a lot of value to having Brandon Ayuk. Whether he's on your team or the trade value that you get for him, say, if you do, need to trade him for whatever reason, which I don't think they should.
No, they should. But you could trade him.
But I think it's a thing where you can, like the team, I think could definitely get back on track.
I don't think it's actually going to happen, and the reason I say that is because I think, unless this team is going to drastically change their direction over the bye week and drastically overhaul their offense, I don't see that changing right now. And that's kind of, as much as I would like to have Brandon Ayuk be doing much better and him playing at a much higher rate, the 49ers targeting him more. The problem is that this is the offense the 49ers have set up, and this is where they are at this point in the season. And I just think that Kyle's going to continue to do what he's been doing throughout the first 5 weeks of the season to an extent where they just don't target Brandon Ayuk. And I think part of it is that Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk do so many similar things so well that last season when the 49ers did lose Deebo Samuel, they had to be so reliant on Brandon Ayuk, right? And I think it was more of the fact that they had no other option than Brandon Ayuk, really, if you look at that receiving core from last season. So I think for them, this is going to continue with Ayuk unless the offense really drastically changes and unless Kyle makes a decision to just manufacture yards for Ayuk, because other than just giving him more end arounds and speed sweeps and fly sweeps, getting him involved at the line of scrimmage, I don't know what they can actually do more realistically, because he has some of the highest amount of routes run. He's been on the field just as much as any other receiver besides Debo. So the opportunities are certainly there. I just don't know if they're going to take full advantage of it in the 49ers offense. And I really think that this is just what it's going to be like with Brandon Ayuk this season, unfortunately.
Yeah, and maybe you, maybe like it changes next year, and maybe they get him more involved or something like that. But you hope that he can get more involved, and you hope that there's like a reciprocation on both sides, and maybe there should be like Ayuk should maybe like be demanding a little bit more.
Yeah,
and
maybe
maybe and we don't know, like we don't know how like those kinds of conversations happen, like because you see sometimes receivers are like, hey, I need to get the ball, like get me the ball more, like please, like in those kinds of conversations. But we haven't seen that enough from Ayuk, and I think he does have wide receiver one potential. And I looked it up, and it was Dez compared him to young Julio, like a young Julio Jones,
yeah.
and that's where Sanu chimed in, because Sanu has seen Julio play, and obviously they're on the same team together, so that's where that comparison is. But yeah, I think it's just, I think part of it depends on who the quarterback is, and part of it depends on Kyle getting him the ball for sure.
Yeah, well, I think part of it depends on the quarterback. The thing is that, like we've seen from both quarterbacks, neither of them want to particularly target Ayuk. So I just, I've been one of the proponents of saying, oh, he'll do much better when Trey Lance is playing. But we just saw him start with Trey Lance with no George Kittle, and he didn't even really target him at all. So I really think this is just going to be something that it's just going to be this year with Ayuk, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it can't be. Yeah, and it can't be like, you target him, because I think they targeted him 4 times, and then be like, hey, look, he's second highest targets. Like he needs to like considerably be the second most targeted player on this team, at least right now, because you have to target Debo, and you have to prioritize him right now, because he's the best player on the team right now. So
yeah. Well, and you know what? Let's talk about another 49er who's gone missing, because we've kind of run our path with the Ayuk thing, and I think there's a lot of people still, even if you listen to experts, Vinny, people who are as tapped in with the 49ers, they still don't know what's going on with Brandon Ayuk. So we sure as hell ain't going to be able to figure it out, honestly. It's just going to be a mystery for now. But let's talk about Diamador Lenore, too, and some of the other draft picks, right? Aaron Banks, Trey Sermon, Diamador Lenore, Ambry Thomas. Let's start with those day 2 guys, because those are some guys, right? You hope to draft them. You're expecting to get maybe one starter out of those 3 at least immediately. And 49ers haven't found any starters with any of those day 2 draft picks. And I think it's really emblematic of what we've seen from the 49ers recently, which is that there are certain positions that they know how to draft, right? But they can do really well drafting them on day 3 of the draft. The problem is that they over-prioritize them so much that they reach for guys in day 2. And then, you get your Aaron Banks of the world, your Trey Sermons, or your Ambry Thomas, where each of the 3 players who were picked at the same position as them have all played more, right? You look at Jalen Moore, right? He came in and he played immediately for Trent Williams when he went down against the Seahawks for the last drive of that game. You look at Diamador Lenore, he played the first 3 games as a defensive player. He hasn't recorded any snaps since, but Ambry Thomas hasn't recorded many at all, like defensive snaps, less than 10, really. And then Trey Sermon. The 49ers clearly favor Elijah Mitchell and don't trust Trey Sermon at all. And quite honestly, Vinny, once they do get more healthy at that running back room, Trey Sermon might he'll still be on the roster, but he is going to be the last running back on the roster once JaMychal Hasty and Jeff Wilson Jr. return from injury at some point. So we're talking about the fourth running back on the team. We're talking about Aaron Banks, who can't beat out Daniel Brunskill or even get dressed. And then Ambry Thomas, who can't beat out the rookie who's picked two rounds later than him. And yeah, I just think it's fair to look at this draft class and look at what the 49ers have done overall and really question their mid-round picks. Because right now, I don't know if they should be picking any of those picks. I mean, I understand they've gotten, some value out of Debo, but then, really look at, they could have just redone their draft. Could have easily gone Asante Samuel Jr. They could have picked the guard Josh Myers, who's been starting, and then they easily could have gone Javonte Williams, or if Trey Sermon was still there, or if Michael Carter was there, that's another running back. So 49ers had other options than what they ended up doing with their draft picks, and I just think it's really confusing for them to play these lesser picked players over the higher picked players when these are the players you guys drafted. There's just a lot of disconnect going on between the front office and the coaching staff. We're going to talk about that later, Vinny, but with the draft picks, what do you make of this? Because this is really a head scratcher to me.
Yeah, it's weird. I think it's definitely something that you aren't really used to seeing, because starting with this 2017 with this Shanahan Lynch regime, they've hit more on their later picks than their earlier picks. And you talk, Fred
really,
Warner was a third round pick.
Let's just talk day 3 picks versus day 2 picks, right? Because I think they've done well in some of their first round picks. They've for the hit rate.
Well, yeah, some were
they're fine.
Lob, Bosa, you have to take Bosa too. And
of course,
I think you had to trade up to get one of those quarterbacks. And even before you get back to your point, even some people are still questioning about the Trey Lance pick altogether.
Yeah,
they could in Fields, but that's the main guy. But yeah, continue.
No, I was just gonna say, I just think it's interesting that collectively, if you took all the day 2 picks versus all the day 3 picks and the value that the 49ers have gotten out of them, you would go back and you would tell this regime to trade all their day 2 picks. You'd say literally just trade them for day 1 and day 3 picks. Do not draft in rounds 2 or 3 guys, because you don't know how to draft those players. And I really think it's not even the day 2 thing. I think it's just a positional value thing where the 49ers are all out of whack, right? You look at, they draft Javon Kinlaw 13th, 14th overall, right? I don't understand that move at all. And even going back to when it happened, right? The 49ers have proved their ability to go and draft defensive interior linemen in the 4th, 5th, 6th round and get value out of them very easily. And they've proven that with Chris Kaserik, they have the type of guy where you don't need to take top-end talent to be able to produce at that position. So why the hell did they take top-end talent at that position? That's the type of decisions I don't understand with the 49ers, where they clearly set up their team in a certain way to be successful at certain things, and then they don't maximize that value, right? Why pick Javon Kinlaw when you can go and get your DJ Jones of the world, Contavious Street? You can go get Zach Kerr off the street. There's so many examples. Listen, if you want a player like Javon Kinlaw or a big nose tackle, go get Snacks Harrison. There were other ways that the 49ers could have gone about this. And I think you look at a few key positions like the Aaron Banks pick, for example. Then you look at Mike McGlinchey. Then you look at some of these other picks, and you really start to wonder, man, what are the 49ers doing where they're shooting themselves in the foot by making it just they're making it harder on themselves with these drafts, Vinny. And that's the problem I have, is that there's opportunities that they have to take really good players and players where they know they need them in the future, like corner, for example, but they pass on those opportunities because they believe in taking guards in the second round, right? That's the type of decision-making where, man, we have to know who's responsible for these picks, because right now it's just a lot of finger pointing. And honestly, I think the thing that's saving John Lynch's job right now is the fact that we don't know who exactly is doing what aspects of what in the job, right? And because I think if we did know who made each and every decision, Vinny, someone in this front office would have been fired by now based on some of these decisions.
Mm-hmm. And I think, yeah, it's just such a tough thing too, just because I think some of their, like, I think some of the evaluations of those guys that are taking are, at least justified. But because I think, like, with Jalen Hurd in particular, like, I think they did their right homework and stuff, in the sense, like, he was a good player, like, he was a good, like, prospect out, like, heading into they drafted him, but it's just like, I think just the injury history was just too much that they like, it feels like sometimes they're like drafting players with their injury history, hope that just past history.
Yep.
And hoping that it wouldn't, happen again. And like, I just think, yeah, it's just an interesting thing how, like, all these early round picks, like some of these early round picks haven't necessarily been hitting, or at least hitting to the level of the expectation that they had. Because I think, I think it's a little unfair to do this. I think the Kinlaw pick was made with the expectation to fill in the role for Buckner.
And that was a mistake
when they traded him. But I still think Javon Kinlaw is still there. I think there's still some potential there. And I think part of it is just like him having to get healthy and stuff. But yeah, it's definitely a weird situation, and it's a fluid one. But I think it's going to be interesting to see how they address some of the stuff going forward. Like, ultimately, like we've seen this year, like, you can't necessarily rely on Jason Verrett to be there every game, and having those positional values is super important.
Yeah, and that's my problem with the 49ers is they don't really have any concept of positional value in the NFL. And I say that a little jokingly because, look, they do. But if you look across the board for the 49ers, there's so many times when they spend premium capital, free agency money, whatever, on players that they just don't need, or players where they could get much cheaper, better options. And that's the problem I have with the 49ers, is that they don't invest in certain positions that you need premium players at, and they rely on, guys who are getting hurt or guys who they can get off the scrap heap. Now, other positions, they overdo it so much that you have a guy like Javon Kinlaw who you really don't need and who isn't really helping your team in a significant way, and that's a top 13 draft pick you just spent on a player who, listen, you're probably getting the same level of play with DJ Jones with. So I think for the 49ers, they just got to be smarter about these draft picks moving forward, have better positional value. And if you're a 49ers fan, the problem for you is that you don't know who's responsible for these draft picks because, Shanahan's making these draft picks. John Lynch is making these draft picks. There are all these different people in the organization who fans think are doing this or doing that, or Adam Peters is doing this, he's making these draft picks. It's like, oh yeah, George Kittle, Fred Warner, yeah, DJ Jones, that's all Adam Peters. And John Lynch, he picked Jalen. Like, it's all over the place with how this fan base sees what this organization is doing. And I think the 49ers, they don't have to be more transparent. In fact, as an organization, you shouldn't be more transparent. But the fact is that 49ers fans are going to start blaming someone at some point. And I'm telling you, it's going to be John Lynch after a while. If they don't tell us who's making what picks, fans are just going to decide that John Lynch is the enemy, because someone has to be held responsible for all these draft picks that the 49ers have missed on. And listen, if they hit on Trey Lance, great. That makes it a lot better. It makes it a lot easier to swallow some of the hard pills that the 49ers have had. But then you look back over the last 4 years, and Vinny, it's the type of thing where it really brings down your team's potential in the future because you weren't able to cash in on those third round picks like many other teams in the NFL do. I mean, look at guys like Trayvon Diggs right now or Asante Samuel. Two guys who could have been available to the 49ers but weren't, and they didn't pick those guys because they valued other things more, like Javon Kinlaw and Aaron Banks. So, you know, I really just think their value system is out of whack. And moving forward, someone's got to take some responsibility in some way, or at least take the majority of it. Because right now it's not clear who's making what draft picks. And fans are just going to start blaming John Lynch after a while if they can't figure out who is.
Yeah, because ultimately he has the tag of general manager.
Right.
And
right.
That's where I think, to your point, that's where some of the more of the blame will go. But in theory,
I think that's a mistake on John's part, honestly. The fact that things are the way they are, the fact that fans are so confused about who's doing what, that's on you, John. And like you said, Vinny, because he is the GM and because he has that ultimate quote-unquote decision-making, even though, again, like I was just speculating, we don't know who's making what decisions when, they're just going to blame John Lynch because that's all you can blame in terms of personnel decisions. So I do want to talk about one personnel decision that I know a lot of 49ers fans were highly critical of and are still very highly critical of and will be on full display this week on Sunday Night Football. Let's talk about the DeForest Buckner trade, Vinny. Let's get into a few things with this. We've been covering a lot with the Javon Kinlaw part. We can get back to that at the end of this topic. But first with Buckner, essentially the pitch that you'll hear from a lot of 49ers fans, media member, people part of the community is that the 49ers had to choose. They had to choose between Eric Armstead and Jimmy Ward
Kittle
or Buckner. I don't think that was true, Vinny, but let's assume that is true. Do you think the 49ers made the right decision?
Yes and no. I think the decision had to do more with Kittle and Buckner versus those other guys. I think they would have found a way. They had paid one. They would have been able to get money to those other guys in different ways. But at the same time, DeForest Buckner was your best defensive player in that Super Bowl run. Like, I know Bosa, and I have high praise of Bosa, and I love Bosa and all of that. And I thought, would have won the Super Bowl MVP in the Super Bowl if they had won. But Buckner is just unreal, and he did so much for that team. And that's where, I think my problem more with the Buckner trade is not the guys that they kept, but the lack of assets that they got back in that trade. Because I think they could have gotten more in that trade because all they got was that 14th pick. It was one first-round pick. And you see what Jamal Adams was traded for, 2 firsts and a third. And DeForest Buckner is a better football player than Jamal Adams is. I think that's, at least for me.
And the story goes,
and I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the story goes is that essentially the 49ers, they were in talks with DeForest Buckner and his agent, and how things went down supposedly is that they told him, look, we don't want to match you at this number. If you can find someone who will agree to this number and will give us a first round pick, you'll be on that team. And they didn't think that Buckner would be able to get that. And guess what? He called their bluff, and he was right.
And the thing with Buckner too is that he said he would have met in the middle. He wanted to stay with the 49ers, and he wanted to he said he was willing to take a little bit less than what they're asking just to play for the team. But yeah, I would have liked to have seen them trade or get more from that trade. But also at the same time though, we talked about how the defensive production, even without Kinlaw and DJ Jones, would the 49ers be in a worse position today if they didn't have George Kittle on their offense than if they would be, because we talked about this defense still being pretty good I think it's safe to say, like, even without Buckner, and they're still like a top 10 defense, at least in my eyes, would they be as good of an offense without George Kittle? I would say no. Like, I don't think they're as like. I think we see it with the running game in particular, and I think he brings more to one side of the ball than Buckner does to the other. So I think that's where, and plus you've seen, like, I know Eric Armstead like doesn't get much like statistically in terms of numbers, but he's had a really good season so far this year.
Well, he's actually like top of the NFL in pressures right now.
Yeah,
so,
and he's doing really well. And like Kittle, we obviously know what he is, and Jimmy Ward, he's been playing really well as
super
well.
key
So
to the 49ers success.
Yeah, and so like that's where I think it's not the wrong decision given the guys that they were able to get back, but also like it's always like a little bit of a, pain having to trade one of your best players on your team, especially someone who was, so beloved by the, 49ers fan base, and someone that, he was the team captain. He was a leader on this team.
No question.
And that's what makes it kind of suck, but
for sure. And I will say this, Vinny, I think that my issue with the Buckner trade is what they did after the trade, not what they did for the trade. Because I think realistically, you mentioned they could have got potentially more than what they got for Buckner. I felt like the 14th overall pick was just about maybe you could have gotten another pick involved, but to me, that's not bad value for a player when you're trading them, and you know that next team has to sign him to a brand new contract as the top paid player at the position. That's where that came into that, and I think in hindsight, it's easy to look back and say, "Oh, wow, look at Javon Kinlaw now. You picked him to replace Buckner. That was so dumb." I think the worst part is trying to replace Buckner with that same pick, right? I just mentioned the 49ers and all the things that they've been able to do with defensive linemen, DJ Jones, Contavious Street. Look at the guys they brought in this offseason who are able to fill those holes, right? Who we were looking at that interior defensive line. We said, who are the 49ers going to cut? Because that guy's going to make a team almost immediately, When you talk about this team's ability to get those types of players constantly, the fact that they went after another defensive lineman with that premium of a pick, especially an interior defensive lineman, to me was the biggest mistake of this whole trade and this whole situation, is that they tried to do a 1-to-1. And because they were so focused on the 2019 Super Bowl year, they were focused on replacing parts rather than just getting their team better. And look, we still don't know exactly what's going to happen with Javon Kinlaw or even Brandon Ayuk. But I will say this, Vinny, honestly, might have been smarter for the 49ers just to pick CeeDee Lamb first and then go with a defensive player second. Because right now, with how the way things are turning out, CeeDee Lamb was the guy who Kyle said, right? Oh, yeah, him and Brandon Ayuk were my favorite two receivers in the draft. Those were the two guys we were looking at. If they'd instead decided to go with Lamb, who's shown how elite he is, and then they were able to get a corner or another piece on the defensive side of the ball potentially, or even an offensive player, right? To me, that would have made the situation a lot better, because you're not first of all putting pressure on Kinlaw like the way they did by making that trade in the first place, and then by bringing in CeeDee Lamb instead of Ayuk. That's a guy who I liked a lot better, and quite honestly is so much more complimentary to Deebo Samuel's skill set than I think Ayuk is, even though him and Ayuk are great together. Don't get me wrong. I think if the 49ers have went about this a little differently, we wouldn't be sitting here today like, why'd you make that Javon Kinlaw pick? Because it was just such a mistake for this 49ers trying essentially replicate what they did the season before. And that's the problem, is they had this mindset, right, of they lost the Super Bowl and they said, oh, okay, we're losing Buckner and Sanders. We'll replace them with Ayuk and Kinlaw. That'll just fix itself. Like, no, guys, you need to start trying to get better instead of just trying to replace the team you had. And honestly, I fear the 49ers are still in that kind of mindset. So with this Buckner trade, I just wanted to wrap this up by saying this, I guess, that I think, in a vacuum, you look at DeForest Buckner for the 14th overall pick, not a bad trade. Doing what the 49ers did, though, afterwards is where they made their mistake.
Yeah, and all this is so hard to kind of like do and evaluate just because like we don't know the mindset and the understanding of what GMs and head coaches have to go through in making these picks, and it's hard to kind of relate to those things in a way. But in like hindsight, it's like so easy to fall into with these kinds of situations too. But it's just because like I mentioned, I think the evaluations could be all right, and they were all like positions that maybe like they could have drafted differently in, and maybe they made those right decisions in drafting those players at those spots. It's just they just ultimately didn't pan out, and maybe they could have gotten a different player at a different system and that kind of thing too. Because like Solomon Thomas, like he's putting up pretty decent numbers for the Raiders right now, and so like, and I think like maybe he was the obviously it's hard to really say that he was the right pick at the time with Deshaun Watson being there and him falling to 12, but like
Vinny.
I don't know, I think context matter. Like I think that's something that I think the 49ers could address more so than just trying to pick good players. And like some situations too, like I know I'm like kind of all over the place here, but it's like that's just how hard it is being a GM and trying to make all these picks. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out in the future. But
yeah, and we'll see. I think it's going to be interesting seeing Buckner back on the field. Just how everything is going to turn out, all the emotions of Sunday Night Football. But
and real quick too, all of this can be like all of these problems are solved if the quarterback position's right. It's so that's the crazy thing about all this. Like if Trent and like these aren't as big of problems because you have that guy that you can rely. Like look at Seattle. Seattle stinks. Let's be honest here. They stink.
It's a bad team.
They've had a bad roster for years. Honestly, let's be honest here. Like I know I'm just saying this as a Niners fan, and maybe it comes off as bias or whatever, but that roster has been not great. And what's the thing that's been getting them to the playoffs every year? Russell Wilson. So that's where I think it's so important to really hit on this quarterback position, and that's where they're kind of you've seen from this team, they've kind of put all their chips in the middle here, and like this doesn't work, we're screwed. So that kind of thing.
Oof. Yeah, and I'm looking in the comments. I see everyone in here. Shout out to E. Kim and 49er who've been in the chat going back and forth a little bit. I see you guys out there. I think this is where we're gonna end today, guys. With the Buckner thing, listen, enjoy him coming back. I know it's not going to be the best sight for 49ers fans, but hey, maybe they could go and trade for Buckner because right now it seems like, I don't know, maybe something might be cooking there. We'll see. Vinny and I will be back next week, everybody, on Vinny's channel. So make sure right now, if you haven't already, go down in the description below, click on Vinny's channel, make sure you're subscribed, set on notifications so you can see when we're going live. We go live approximately this time every Monday, though. So be on the lookout. We're hoping to have some guests next Monday and then the following weeks. So enjoy your 49ers this week. Have a great week, everybody. And I appreciate everyone for stopping by. Thanks.
Peace.